Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar, HR webinar. Those who don't know me, I'm Tim Kellett. I'm from Paydata, and thank you for joining today's webinar to talk about the budget. Today, just a few logistics. We'll send out the slides for today's webinar afterwards, as well as a recording as well. Just a bit about Paydata and who we are. We're our reward management consultancy, and we help organisations to find, attract, retain, motivate the right sort of people to meet their objectives. And we do this in a number of different ways. So I hope you'll forgive me for mentioning some of the ways that we do it. Next slide, please, Steve. If that's possible. There we go. So I think our primary piece of works that we do is pay and benefits benchmarking. So we help organisations to determine whether their pay and benefits is competitive with the market. We help organisations develop reward and recognition strategies and bonus schemes, and on the reward consulting side. A lot of organisations need some sort of hierarchy for their jobs. So we have our own job evaluation methodology called Pay Grade, and we help people grade their jobs and assess the size of their jobs. That helps with the benchmarking, obviously. That also helps with pay structure development. So we help design and develop and data model pay structures for organisations so that they can make fair and consistent pay decisions. We help organisations with that sort of internal pay equity analysis through equal pay audits. We've been doing those for over 20 years. We help people with the pay review process as well with our online pay review software. And then finally, we provide a whole host of research and insights through these sorts of webinars, through our industry HR workshops as well, through various online reward surveys as well. And from time to time, we bring in subject matter experts for relevant webinars. And I'm delighted today to introduce you to Steve Herbert, who's a seasoned and well-respected HR and employee benefits speaker, commentator, and a coach who's spoken at our conference and a number of our webinars. And I'm delighted today that we've got Steve to talk to us about the implications for employers and employees from last week's autumn budget, which everyone looked at very closely, and what this looks like for 2026 and beyond. So that's enough of me talking, and it's over to you now, Steve. So please take it away.
Morning, Tim. Morning, everyone. I'm not sure about the highly respected bit, by the way, but thank you anyway. I'm going to use the same title that I used for this event last year, which was 13 months ago, because the budget was a bit earlier in 2024, but baffled by the budget, because let's face it, for most people, budgets are quite baffling. We only get the headline messages. And more importantly, what are the implications for employers and, of course, employees too? But before we look forward, it is probably worth just looking back a little bit to position where we were this time last year after the 2024 budget. Now, if you heard me speak at this event last year, you'll remember I spoke about the first half of the 2020s being really tough for all sorts of reasons that we all know about. But it's just worth reminding ourselves how many things were going on in the first half of the 2020s. We had Brexit coming into reality. We had obviously a pandemic, not just here, but around the world. We had a candidate crisis in 22-23 when we just couldn't get enough people working. We've got and still got a war going on the eastern side of Europe. We had a massive inflation bubble in 2022-23. And we even had the spectre of strikes occurring again for the first time in many, many years. And most of those have gone away, thankfully. But nevertheless, that was a real challenge in the first part of the 2020s. And that led to all this debate last year about the black hole that Labour had or hadn't inherited from the previous government. Was it 40 billion? Was it 20 billion? Was it 10 billion? In the end, it was only 10 billion, but it was still a black hole, needed to be filled. And therefore, we had a big raft of tax rises, which, as I think we all know and appreciate, by the way, I'm going to turn my camera off because I hate looking at me, but I am here, guys, don't panic. As I'm sure we all appreciate, the truth of the matter is, most of those taxes hit employers, particularly because of the changes to national insurance, both the reduction in the threshold and the increase in the employer's NI rate, which led Rachel Reeves to say a couple of weeks after the budget that this was a once and done, basically. It's okay. I get it. It was a lot of money. We had to do it. I'm not going to come back for more borrowing or more taxes next year. Yet, of course, we all know that that was going to be a hostage to fortune, and indeed it was a hostage to fortune and changing circumstances. So, two examples of that. Firstly, we obviously have the reality that you can still come into Parliament with a massive majority, but if your backbenchers don't agree with you, you won't necessarily get your legislation through. And that's certainly true of two big landmark points for the Labour Party, which was the personal independent payments being reduced, and indeed the winter fuel allowance that I spoke about last year at both the events I did for Pay Data. Both of those have subsequently been reversed, actually probably cost the Labour government and the government generally more money than it saved in the end picture. So the budget from last year was fundamentally flawed because it was built around those two things being delivered. The other reason that the budget was fundamentally flawed, which to be fair wasn't Rachel Reeves or the Labour Party's fault, was because the second half of the 2020s started just a week after that budget with the return to office of this man. Now, ordinarily, the election of an American president wouldn't really matter that much in the UK. Of course, there are ripples from what happens over there to over here, but this is a very unusual presidency. Not only did he get returned to office, but he also had almost unprecedented power because actually the Republicans also won the Senate and the House as well. And by God, has he been exercising that power over the last 12 months or so. Many of those things have impacted the UK. The DEI changes, so diversity, equity, inclusion, aren't really relevant at the bottom line at the moment, but it's still rumbling on and it's very important for HR people. And it was even on the BBC Business News this very morning. I think it was AT&T are scrapping all of their DE&I policies just to secure an American government contract. The defence costs, though, that does affect the budget. Basically, America has withdrawn from NATO in many respects, leaving Europe to pick up the extra costs, particularly around Ukraine. And that's going to cost an awful lot of money, and therefore means that the budget last year was pretty much lost 7 days after it was delivered. And then we got tariffs, which essentially has done that to the worldwide economy, done that to the worldwide consensus. They may yet be ruled unlawful. In fact, there's every possibility they will be ruled unlawful. But nevertheless, they are proving a challenge for companies, businesses, and governments all around the world. So that takes us to where we are today, and none of it excuses the absolutely chaotic, ridiculous Keystone Cop build-up that we had to this particular budget. And frankly, I don't think Labour can look at anyone other than themselves. It was just a communications nightmare from start to finish. We have been expecting a difficult budget pretty much since the summer when the government told us that would be the case, and certainly since the 4th of November when Rachel Reeves stood up and told us in a breakfast briefing, which was unusual as well, that there was a black hole. Now, how big was that black hole? It's sort of Groundhog Day, really, looking back to last year again. Was it 10 billion? Was it 20 billion? Was it 34 billion, 36 billion, 38 billion? Or indeed, the highest figure I heard was a 40 billion. And actually, the answer to all of that was it wasn't any of those things. In fact, there wasn't even a black hole. When it came to the budget itself, actually, the books were balanced, albeit only marginally. Because 4 billion, it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for running an entire country. But nevertheless, there wasn't a black hole. So actually, all of this uncertainty and people sitting on their hands for the last few weeks was actually a pretty much wasted effort. And it led the IFS in their post-budget briefing to conclude that there was no fiscal repair job. But it does bring us back to the question of, was this a cock-up or a conspiracy to separate us from our taxes? And I think time will tell. You'll have your own views on that. For what it's worth, I don't think the Labour government are organised enough for it to be a conspiracy. I think it's more likely a series of minor cock-ups that have just rolled up together. But either way, and this is where we get to the meat of the matter, folks, it's led to the largest tax rising parliament on record. And let's just pause there. We've only had 2 budgets since Labour came in, and already the projections till the end of this decade is this will be the single largest tax rising parliament on record. So when we get taxes going up, rightly or wrongly, it's entirely up to you which way you think that is, that's obviously going to mean pain. It's going to mean pain for citizens, taxpayers, and indeed for employers. And today I'm very much talking to you from an employer perspective. So that's where we're focused most of this. So let's start with the known knowns before we get on to the meat of the matter, which is this tax threshold freeze, which actually came in under the Conservatives, I think, originally in 2020-21. Then it had a pause for a year, and it's came back with the Conservatives in 2023-24, and it is now going to be with us till the end of this decade. Why are they doing that? Because it creates an awful lot of money. That blue line there, that is government receipts as a result of the tax threshold freeze. If you look on the right-hand side, we're looking between 60 and 70 billion pounds over the decade created from freezing the personal tax thresholds. So it's a big earner for the government. That's why they've done it. And of course, it also is less immediately painful for us as taxpayers because it's sort of deferred pain. We feel it more in the future years than we do right now. What does it actually mean for people? This becomes much more relevant. And what does it mean for your employees as employers? We'll take it in reverse order. If we look at the purple bars now, that's the very top rate of tax, the additional rate of tax in the UK. During the course of the decade, more than 500,000 people have moved from higher rate to additional rate tax. Almost 5 million have moved from basic rate to higher rate tax, and more than 5 million have moved from no tax to some tax. So that is a huge swathe of the working population are paying more taxes as a result of the tax threshold freeze. And if we focus on that yellow bit, because that's particularly pertinent, we got a lot more people paying tax for the first time, and a lot of that is because of this, the minimum pay levels that are dictated by the government each year at about this time. Now, as I said last year, and I will say again next year and for many years to come, I'm quite sure, and I've been saying this for some time, this is a strange conundrum, this, that the Chancellor of the day, whoever they may be, whichever party they may represent, gets to announce the national living wage and the national minimum wage and take the credit with the voters. I've increased your pay, aren't I a lovely person? But actually, it's employers that have to pick up the entire tab here. It doesn't cost the government anything. And in actual fact, the government win out of this because they are going to get more taxation, particularly with tax thresholds being frozen, and they're going to pay out less in means-tested benefits. So this is another example of that. We can see this year that national living wage has gone up by 4%, national minimum wage by 8.5%. You know, these are significant jumps, but it's those figures in red I want you to focus on. Since the start of this decade, national living wage has gone up by almost half. National minimum wage has gone up by way more than half. Those are the sort of salary rises we'd expect to see for a high flyer working their way up through the income scale, not for people joining work perhaps for the first time or part-time employees or whatever it may be. And such is the ridiculousness of this, if I could say that word. We even saw this quote from the Resolution Foundation. Now, it's worth just pausing. The Resolution Foundation pretty much exists to champion the cause of low-paid families. And even the Resolution Foundation was saying that this increase, particularly the national minimum wage increase, was unnecessarily big and could make it harder for people in that age group to find a job because employers are going to struggle. And I'm sure at the end, Tim and I will pick up on this point again because it is really a big challenge for employers. So before I move on to the meat of the budget, let's just focus on minimum pay and the good, the bad and the ugly because there are all three represented here. Firstly, the good. It is, of course, if you are someone at the lower end of the wage scale and you are getting a big uplift in your salary, it's good for your financial well-being. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that financial well-being also supports other well-being too, so physical and mental health, not least, which we'll come back to later on. So it's certainly good for those people who are in the system at the lower end. The bad, of course, is that employers have to pick this up. It's a big tab. Particularly for those in marginal industries. So we're talking hospitality and agriculture, for instance, and even more so for everybody else who's got pay grade inflation. If you've got some people down the bottom on the national living wage or the national minimum wage, then the people above them are going to expect to have a differential in their pay between what the person at the bottom is earning and what they are earning. So what you're going to get is pay escalation through the scales, which obviously has challenges in all sorts of ways for employers, not least that it's inflationary, which is bad for the economy, not least that it actually makes hiring that much harder. Going back to that quote from the Resolution Foundation, if you haven't got the cash, you're not going to hire people, is the bottom line. And it also is another challenge to salary sacrifice because you cannot reduce someone's pay below the national living wage. And if that is going up by leaps and bounds, then you need to keep checking that. So if you take nothing else from today's presentation, if you've got salary sacrifice in place, not just for pensions, for anything, make sure you're checking that you're not reducing people inadvertently past the national living wage or the national minimum wage levels. But of course, that is a nice segue into what is the main reason that most of you will be here today. And it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster, this one, folks. So I apologise in advance, but it's changes to pension salary sacrifice. Now, as I said last year, and I've probably said every year for about the last 20, pensions are an incredibly tax efficient way of saving in the UK. And they swallow up an absolute bucket load of government money, which is used basically to encourage you and I and all of your employees to save for our collective old age. So lots and lots of tax breaks. And as you can see on that figure there on the left, overall, according to the budget, it's around £70 billion each and every year of government money goes into pensions in the form of tax relief. Now, that tax relief is scattered around many different features, and I've listed those on the right. Probably missed one or two, but they're the main ones, if you like. And of course, when you've got £70 billion worth of tax relief, any chancellor at any point in any budget is going to consider some of this. Particularly when the economy has been flatlining, and particularly when we may or may not have a black hole, depending on where you were in that particular cycle of the last 6 weeks or so. So it has come under the microscope. What the government should have done, and in fact, what some governments should have done for some time, is they should have looked at taking away higher rate tax relief, because it's quite difficult to justify in a post-auto enrolment world giving people earning more tax relief than you're giving people who need to save more. But they haven't done that. They should perhaps have returned to the lifetime allowance for pension savings, because that by definition only targets those people that have saved enough for their retirement already, therefore encouraging everyone else to keep going. But where we've ended up is, without question, the worst possible answer for employers, because it is the one that comes with A, lot of complexity, and B, a bloody big admin tab. You know, you guys are going to have to work at this because salary sacrifice is not something you want to play with. It's quite complex anyway. And as you can see in a minute, the way we're going, it's going to get more complex. If you don't know what salary sacrifice on pensions is, well, you can probably rest easy for the next few slides. But the rest of you, hopefully you do know what it's all about. Essentially, it's just changing the way you pay into a pension scheme. Instead of the employee paying in from essentially their take-home money into a pension scheme, the employee will have then suffered national insurance on that contribution, and so would the employer. The employee gives up the right to that money. It's sent direct from the employer to the pension scheme, and both the employee and the employer avoid national insurance. So it's an incredibly tax efficient way of saving, on top of all the other tax efficiencies that we know about. And that means it costs the Treasury money. Now, this is directly from the budget document, and it's kind of a strange quote, actually. Salary sacrifice into pension schemes is forecast to almost treble in costs. Now, when you read that, you're thinking, well, that means during the course of this Parliament. But when you read further, it says from 2016, 2017. So that's the middle of last decade to the beginning of next decade. Nevertheless, we are talking about £8 billion going in salary sacrifice, according to this document. I suspect that's probably wrong, by the way. And therefore, you can see that the government would want to curtail that. And that is exactly what they've done. We are now going to limit or cap the amount that can be sacrificed without paying national insurance contributions at £2,000 per employee per year. Cue an absolute meltdown from pension providers, pension advisors, lots of employers, and quite a few employees, it has to be said, with this is a disaster, is it worth doing anymore, blah, 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 to which my answer is literally that. Don't panic. I mean, really, don't panic. This is a big change. I'm not belittling that, and we'll come to some of that in a second. But we have time on our side because of that bit in blue on that slide there. This isn't happening until tax year 2029-2030. So we got 3 and a bit tax years to go before this actually bites. And when we were thinking of salary sacrifice might be targeted just a few weeks ago, I think the fear was it was going to happen next April. Now, I was never of that opinion, frankly, because I think it was too big an ask. But I did think it'd probably be the year after. So 2029-2030 gives us time. And as we'll see in a minute, that's good because we need it. Why has it been set at 2029-2030? Well, there's all sorts of reasons it could be. I'll give you a few examples there. I think the first one is hopefully where we're going to go with this, to give the government time to consult with employers, with the industry, etc., and provide the guidance you may need. I haven't yet seen any evidence that's happening. Doesn't mean it's not. It may just not across my radar yet. But I certainly think that will be required, and we have time for them to do a good job on that. More importantly is the second one. It provides employers with the time to plan to fund these changes, to implement these changes, and communicate these changes. And they are all significant challenges we'll come to. It also, and I think this is probably a hidden thing, but it's worth noting, because we're already seeing some evidence of employers who haven't used salary sacrifice saying, do you know what, we're going to do it now. We're going to do it till 2029-30 because we suddenly recognize this is a really sensible and clever thing to do. Well, I think if we suddenly see a massive movement of more people saving more through salary sacrifice, the government will look at that as aggressive tax avoidance and curtail it. So I think that's very likely to happen. We saw exactly the same thing with pension freedoms back in the middle of last decade, when there were a couple of loopholes. And as soon as they realised people were starting to use those loopholes, they closed it down. So it gives the government a chance to react to that, if you like. And lastly, and being just a bit of a cynic, as I tend to be, it could just be that 29-30 is because the general election is likely to happen by then. So the last date that the general election can take place for the current parliament, I think it's something like the 15th of August, 2029. Generally speaking, in politics, you never want to go to the last time anyway. You try and go early if you can as a government. So it's almost certain, I would suggest, that whoever is looking after this issue in 29-30 won't be the current government, or if it is the current government, it won't be the same players in position. So it becomes an SEP, somebody else's problem. So pick any of the above, but it does give us time, which is good. Not least because the problem we've got here is everyone, by which I mean employers, uses salary sacrifice just slightly differently. So what are the various combinations? Now, I probably haven't got them all here. There's probably more than I've got on this slide, but this will give you a flavour of just how complex this has got over the years. So if you like, the pure form of pension salary sacrifice is that the employee obviously benefits from their tax relief and their national insurance saving, and the employer's national insurance saving is put back in to help the employee too. So the employee gets a treble winner out of it, if you like. So that is the pure form of salary sacrifice, and possibly the easiest to unpick, albeit your employees won't be very happy. The second version, which happened a lot, was that the employee gets their national insurance saving, but the employer uses their national insurance saving for other things, running the business, essentially, the bottom line, however you want to talk about it. And that could become a challenge. The third one, which I suspect is probably most pertinent amongst the audience for a pay data event, is that the employer's national insurance saving is actually used to fund other employee benefits, other areas of employee well-being. So actually the two things become linked because you're relying on this national insurance saving to provide the funds for everything else. Then we've got people using it as a tax avoidance measure, trying to keep away from crossing those tax thresholds we spoke about earlier on. We've got others that use it as a bonus sacrifice scheme. So just for people getting bonuses each year, give up your bonus before you get it, avoid tax, avoid national insurance, likewise the employer, everyone's a winner. And then you've got lots of companies now that are doing some or all of the above. And whichever way you're using your scheme will really restrict and direct how you're going to respond to this challenge. So there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, I'm afraid, folks, because it much will depend on how you use the scheme over the course of the last few years. Bottom line is different employers will face different challenges. And the hidden problem, which is hidden admittedly in plain sight, is that bit there. It's this £2,000 per employee line. Now, why have the government done that? Well, according to the budget document, it's because it means not many people will be caught by the limit for salary sacrifice. 74% of basic rate taxpayers will be okay, essentially, as a result of this £2,000 limit. But just pause there and turn it on its head. That means that 26% of basic rate taxpayers will not be okay. They will be caught by the limit. So immediately we've suddenly got two lots of communication, two lots of calculations going on because we've got two different audiences. And what about higher rate taxpayers and additional rate taxpayers? What about the people down the bottom who can't do this at all because they're below national or they're at national living wage? That means we're going to have several employee groupings and several lots of calculations and several different payments going on, which is going to make this really, really messy. Now, I did start off by saying don't panic about the time, and I do genuinely mean that. We have time on our side. But equally, I don't want you to be too blasé and say, well, Steve said it's okay. We're just kick back on this, we're fine. Because it will come round incredibly fast. And I speak as someone who is well known for talking about pensions auto-enrolment from the very first white paper onwards. And back then, I often heard people say, well, it's 5 years away, Steve. Why are you telling us now? And they were invariably the companies that got caught out at the end because they hadn't done their planning. The bottom line is salary sacrifice is potentially really complex. And unpicking bits of it and reordering some of it, particularly around this £2,000 issue, equally is complex. You may need to therefore involve your payroll provider or providers, your pension advisor or advisors, your pension providers, your legal advisors, because it does affect contracts of employment, your leadership team, who are likely to be quite miffed about this because they're going to be losing out quite big time personally, which never makes for a good conversation. And of course, you're going to have to communicate with your employees. In fact, I suspect many of you have already had at least one or two employees contact you about this. And you're going to have some cohesive conversation with your employees that actually backs everyone up and doesn't leave anyone misguided about what's going on. So that's a lot of different professional advisors and a lot of different audiences that you need to be engaging with. And when we get close to 2029, assuming this goes ahead, and I'm sure someone will ask that question later on, but when we get close to 2029, there will be a capacity crunch, because not all of these people are going to be available all the time, particularly payroll providers, who I think are going to be right under the cosh on this one. So whilst you don't need to panic now, you do want to start thinking about what you're going to do and start putting it on the radar of the leadership team. Look, we've got this coming up. We need to make it happen. We're going to need to fund this, etc., etc. Let's have a plan in place. And just before I move off salary sacrifice in pensions, just going back to something that I was pausing on earlier on about the tax reliefs in pensions. So let's say after taking out salary sacrifice, or at least higher levels of salary sacrifice, that the savings going into pension schemes each year from government money drops from 70 billion to 62 billion. And that's just a finger in the air. It could be anything, frankly. Are pensions still worth doing? Of course they are. There's still £62 billion of government money going into tax breaks. They remain incredibly tax efficient. They've just been a bit more tax efficient all the time that salary sacrifice was available. So if you are being contacted by employees about are pensions worth it, the answer is yes. Absolutely they are. They are incredibly tax efficient. They may just change a little bit in the future. So that's quite a lot about financial well-being, or almost the opposite of well-being, because we're going to make things slightly worse for people. What else was in the budget about financial well-being and your employees? Well, it's a budget. So there's always going to be degrees of give and take. That's kind of the form. In terms of improvements, though, I thought there were some quite good, they're small improvements, but actually, when taken in the round, they will make a big difference to people, particularly people on lowish salaries. So there's the aim of reducing the energy bills per household at £150 a year. That's not insignificant. There's freezing of prescription charges. And the third one there, I think, is really quite important. The freeze on rail fares and the £3 bus fares continuing for another year. That really does help an awful lot of working people. So I think we've got to take that as read. On the other side, we've got some bigger measures that nevertheless are good for financial well-being. Revisit the care allowance issue, which has been frankly a scandal over the last few years, and that's good. Removing the two-child benefit limit, which will move an awful lot of families out of poverty. That's got to be a good thing. And of course, the national minimum wage, national living wage. We may not like it as employers, but our employees receiving it, of course, will be very grateful. So on the financial well-being things, we've got some improvements. We've got a few detriments, erosions, if you prefer, as well. The three key ones being taxation on property, dividend, and savings, all going up by 2p in the pound, but not just yet. That's down the line a little bit in this government. But it's important to remember that as far as financial well-being goes, and particularly lower paid people, the vast majority won't be anywhere near those taxes. That's from the budget document. The vast majority of taxpayers have no taxable savings, dividend, or property income. I'm not saying it's not important. Of course it is, but not really a big driver against most workforces. So that's financial well-being. What about physical and mental well-being, which are linked, of course, to financial well-being in my trusty well-being triangle? Well, there's the normal sort of money going into NHS, and if we're trying to look for a positive of the current government, they are doing good things with the National Health Service, and I think we should all applaud that. But what they did reference, albeit passingly, in the budget was this quote in the middle there, the Keep Britain Working Review, which isn't part of the budget, but did come out the day after Rachel Reeves' doom breakfast briefing, and does take us down a rabbit hole that I think we need to consider, because although it hasn't had as much publicity as it should have had, this will be a big push for employers in the years immediately ahead. So what's the Keep Britain Working Review all about? Well, it was published, I say, on the 5th of November, I think it was this year. And it's all about trying to get people back into the workplace and off the sickness and unemployment benefits. The bottom line is 1 in 5, so more than 20% of the potential working age population of the UK are not looking for work, not in work, and are probably out because of health reasons. Claimants in the UK for health reasons have gone up by 800,000 since the start of the decade, and if it isn't curtailed, will increase by at least another 600,000 by the end of the decade. That is why the government were trying to change personal independence payment and all that jazz, because frankly, we cannot afford that as a nation. To borrow from the report itself on the right there, our society is getting older, living longer, and becoming sicker sooner. That kind of is the truth, and we'll come back to that in just 1 second. And of course, ill health costs. It costs the government a shed load of money. It costs employees, particularly those unlucky enough to suffer ill health, a shed load of money too. A 22-year-old who's forced out of work because of ill health could lose around £1 million worth of earnings over what would have been their career. Even an older worker, someone such as myself, who's forced out of work because of ill health, could lose 200,000 between their 50s and retirement age. And that last quote, I think, is really quite compelling. Being out of work results in a loss of well-being that is unmatched in any other domain of life, up to and including the loss of a partner. So it really is bad news for the employee, but of course we're more concerned with the employer for today's audience, and it costs the employers. You know this, guys. And these are average figures, and actually I think they're a low average figure in both cases. But the average cost of sickness absence per day per employee in the UK is £120. And replacing an employee lost to ill health on average is £11,000. I think both of those figures are fairly conservative. And for many of you, it'd be much, much more than that. And of course, we do know that sickness absence is really on the march again. Now, I'm not teaching you to suck eggs. I'm sure you've seen this graph before, guys. But the CIPD put out their survey of absence in September, I think it was this year. And you can see that since the start of the decade, absence per employee per year on average has increased by more than 50%. And that's after years of it going down. So we have a problem with sickness absence. It's getting out of control, both for the government and for employers, and therefore we need to do something. And going back to that quote about becoming sicker sooner, this slide kind of demonstrates that. The figures on the right there, that's healthy life expectancy, how long we can expect to live on average in good health in the UK. And you can see for both males and females alike, it's dropped around 62.5 years in recent years, at the same time that the retirement age has escalated rapidly. So just a few years ago, women were retiring at age 60, men at 65. Now both are retiring at 67, and that will go up further and further in the years ahead because the government, whichever government, cannot afford to pay old age pensions. So we know we're going to need a lot more people in the workplace for longer who are iller than perhaps they used to be. And of course, we've also got a big wave of younger people coming through, particularly with mental health problems as well. This is all a big headwind for the UK. So what did the Keep Britain Working Review recommend? What's it mean for employers? Well, the good news is they weren't looking for any more cash out of employers. They recognise that you're spending money on employee benefits, and that's a good thing. But they also recognise we need to direct that money better, which is something I've been saying for years and years. Many of you will have heard me say it. So I completely concur with that. It's easier said than done, mind you, trust me. And they also recognise that this is going to take a bit of time. You can't just do it overnight. So the target is to deliver this between 3 and 7 years. So we're looking way into the 2030s before this is concluded. But the first 3 deliverables are due to happen in the next 3 years. What they call, rather pompously, I think, the vanguard phase of the development. The first point is developing a healthy working lifestyle, but importantly, as a certified standard that employers can apply for to show that they're doing this stuff. Now, that's quite a big conversation that we're not going to have today. Certainly can do next year, by all means, guys. But that's something that employers can and should be aspiring to, and we need to look at that next year. The second point is just encouraging that better provision of workforce health, workplace health. I don't think that's a particularly big challenge. We just got to do it better. And the third thing is creating a workplace health intelligence unit, which again is rather pompous. What they're basically talking about there is a lot of data to help you make decisions and to justify to leadership teams, etc., why you're spending the money. of the three, I think that's the least important. I think we've got so much data already, we don't need that. What we need to do is make things work a bit better. So that was Keep Britain Working. We've had the budget as well. Where does that leave us before we go off for a bit of a chat about what's going on? There are three major challenges ahead for employers as I see it. There's probably more for you as in actual individual employers. Firstly, we have this budget that, although it's the 2025 budget, it's got a very long tail. So this is 2025 through to 2029. Essentially, this will be shaping all of our collective workplaces. Secondly, we had the Employment Rights Bill, which I'm certainly not qualified to speak on, but changed even last week, as I'm sure some of you saw, and will change again in the future, and does represent the biggest change in employment rights in the career of most of us. And now we have the Keep Britain Working review that's going to run at least until 2028 and probably till about 2032, which is going to start shaping how we respond to sickness absence in the workplace. So that's three big changes all happening essentially in concert. This is going to be a difficult time, particularly when we accept that salary sacrifice is going to take up a huge focus for many of you in the months, years ahead. So my final thoughts. Minimum pay levels continue to be a challenge. I can't see that changing anytime soon because it is such a free hit for the Chancellor, unfortunately. We just got to live with it and try and do our best with the challenges of it. Salary sacrifice on pensions clearly is the big challenge for employers from this budget, and you shouldn't be panicking about it yet, but you do need to start planning because, as I say, this is a much bigger exercise than I think people think it is, and it's easy to get wrong. Let's be honest. It's much easier to get it wrong than get it right, and you don't want to be making that mistake. So that's pretty much me done. I shall now pass back to Tim to move us off there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. That was really, really interesting. I've picked up a lot of things, made lots of notes about that as well. So thank you. We do have one or two questions. This is the time to ask them in the Q&A chat. But the first question, which straight off the mark was by Laura, was, is the £2,000 salary sacrifice limit only applicable to pensions contributions, or can it apply to other salary sacrifice schemes as well? Do you know the answer?
Yeah, it is only pensions. I mean, the range of salary sacrifice offerings has been reduced quite dramatically during the course of this decade anyway, but this is definitely specifically about pensions, so I won't worry about other things.
Okay, and thank you very much. Thanks, Steve. I think James says, we currently do not offer a salary sacrifice pension scheme. Do you think we still need to communicate this ahead of 2029?
No. I think if you haven't got a challenge with it, you don't want to start creating one. I think if you start talking about it, then you will invariably get a couple of people saying, well, we want to take advantage of that now for the next 2 years. And then you'll end up having to unpick it at the end. And again, there's also the possibility that you could be considered taking advantage of the current system if you take my meaning. So I would steer clear from offering it. If you haven't done it yet, take the win. You haven't got to worry about this in the future. That's good news for you, frankly.
I mean, we were at one of our HR events last week, and I think a number of employers were sort of talking about, is this something we do want to do? Well, we've got that window of opportunity before this comes in, if they're not currently doing. So I suppose it's, as you say, Steve, it's sort of depending on the different employers, different organisations will have a different position, won't they?
Yeah, there'll always be people. Suddenly, I mean, the strange thing is, I've been talking about this subject for literally 20 odd years. I mean, it's been one of my pet subjects, and getting people to actually understand that it was a great thing has been a challenge, and they got there eventually. And now we're suddenly going to get a wave of people think, I've been missing out. I want to do this. Now is not the time to do it, in my opinion. I think you'll be opening up a can of worms. Yes, you'll get some tax advantages, but I wouldn't go there right now.
I think that's what. So Becky was just saying in the chat, we were planning to launch a salary sacrifice scheme for April. So would you advise against this now? And so I think you've just advanced that, haven't you?
Depends who you've told, I guess.
Yeah.
If you've already communicated it as this is what we're doing, aren't we wonderful? Then I think you're kind of hamstrung. But otherwise, I would try and just retreat from that one if you can.
Okay, no, thank you. So I've got another one. This one from let's see, Diana. Does the salary sacrifice cap impact the bonus salary sacrifice scheme?
it will apply to anything that's going into a pension scheme. So if that's how you're using it, then yes.
Actually, Gemma was going to ask a question, which I was going to, which was, what do you think the likelihood is of the pension salary sacrifice changes actually happening in their current form in 2029?
How long have you got? I mean, let's start with where we are. Yeah, exactly. Let's start with where we are now. Rachel Reeves is, and indeed the government, are under a huge amount of pressure as people are starting to look at what was and wasn't known about this budget when she was making various statements throughout November. Will she be forced out of office? I can't immediately see it, but you never say never. It's politics; anything can happen. I think if Rachel Reeves is still in office, I think it will definitely happen. I think if a different chancellor takes over from Rachel Reeves, it will pretty much happen. Because what's the alternative? The alternative would be that whoever comes into, even if it's a different party, whoever comes into power has still got to create that headroom to keep the economy going. And the obvious place to look for it, as it has been for some years, is pensions. And having got people down that line, much as I think it's the wrong way to go, I think they should have gone for higher rate tax relief, which would have been quite simple. Painful, but simple. Having got people somewhere down that line, I think trying to reverse that would be difficult and unwise, probably. So I think it will happen. Will it happen by 2029? That is a different conversation. If there is a big capacity crunch in 2029 or 2028, which I think there would be, then there may have to be some grace in there. But I just don't know. Is the honest answer.
I suppose it's so far down the line. Lots can happen between now and then, and yeah. So, Julie asked about the 2K limit. Is that on the employee contributions or employer or both?
Just the employee, as I understand it. Again, we haven't got any detailed guidance, so I'm having to guesstimate based off what I know on this subject, which is a lot because it's a subject I'm quite close to. So it's just on the employee contribution. I mean, one of the difficulties, again, I think they've made a mistake by going for this one, is it is entirely possible that you could just change your contracts and just increase the employer pension contribution and forget all about salary sacrifice, just restructure people's pay, and that would get you around it, frankly, which I think will, again, be aggressive tax avoidance. So I think there's all sorts of ways around it, but it is just the employees element we're talking about for the moment.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Steve. I noticed one or two questions about instantly about the slides and the recording. We'll send out the slides and a link to the recording to anyone who's registered today. So if you've been having any technical issues or anything, I'm sure you'll be able to sort of see the recording and definitely see the slides afterwards. Anyway, Michelle asked a question, actually an interesting one, around do you have a view on the increase of voluntary real living wage, which has gone up in excess of 7% this year, and it's causing additional eradication of pay ranges for different roles. And we've a lot of our customers, a lot of people in our HR workshops have talked about this sort of pay compression challenges of that's going up much higher at a higher rate than most people's annual pay awards, and so therefore creating that sort of that compression of pay around the sort of most junior levels and the supervisory levels as well. So what's your view on that then, Steve?
My view on that would not be as informed as yours, Tim, because this is much closer to your wheelhouse than mine. But yes, I mean, I was and I remain a big supporter of things like the national living wage. I think it's great. But the problem we've got is they have to, I mean, and certainly the living wage, which is the legal requirement as opposed to the voluntary one. But the problem is it's got to be practical. And if you get to the point, which is what the Resolution Foundation was saying, that this is too much, then all you do is shoot yourself in the foot, because then you get less people in employment and therefore less people able to get out of poverty and the rest of it. So I think it has gone too far, which is not to say people aren't suffering, because of course they are. You know, it's been a really difficult decade. In fact, it's been really difficult since 2008, to be honest. So there are people that are suffering, but there does need to be a bit more of a balance going on both in the legal requirements and the voluntary ones to make it a bit more practical.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the discussions, there's no silver bullet about it. It's difficult managing, the relativities. I think in regards to the real living wage, there's some people who have been accredited to it and who are sort of quietly coming out of it and not making a huge song and dance about it. There's others who were considering being accredited and now reining that back and thinking actually we don't want to be make a huge announcement if we decide to come out of it at some point. So we'll just keep a watching brief on it and try do what we can with it, but it may become unaffordable for us at some point anyway. So I think
I think that's the challenge here. That's the reality is, a lot of companies want to do the right thing, but you don't want to nail yourself the colours to the mast and then be taken down as a result of that. It's
exactly. I actually, this next question actually from Parissa was a similar one I was going to ask as well. So, which is, are there any proactive steps employers should be looking at to take now regarding the Keep Britain Working review? So, is there any? I suppose it's almost like what would you recommend as the sort of next steps to take in terms of, but I think it's not just the Keep Britain Working review, but also post-budget. What sort of would be perhaps the sort of top 2 or 3 things to look at to sort of address first as an employer?
Well, I think let's just take the Keep Britain Working review first. I think the first thing to do, if you haven't read it, read it. I mean, I'm not saying it's a great read, because it isn't, and I'm not saying there's anything particularly new in there, because there isn't. But at least it will give you the starting position of where we are. There is this vanguard phrase, which I say is very pompous, but I think basically what they're looking for there, is for various companies to volunteer to be part of the scheme. In that sort of vanguard phase to prove how things work. I think that would be a good thing for many of you to do if you haven't done it already. So that's a good place to go. But if you're just thinking about a simple win rather than waiting on the Keep Britain Working review, there's sort of 2 points to that. Firstly, there's my trusty well-being triangle: physical, mental, financial health. Try and get those in balance, because each supports the other side of that triangle. And secondly, if you haven't done it, and you may be doing this really well, folks, in which case, well done. Improve your absence interventions. So when people go off ill, don't leave it too long until you intervene, because the longer someone is off ill, the more likely they're going to be off for a long time. Intervene early, point them towards the support they've got, get their treatment early. They're more likely to come back earlier and be productive earlier, which is good for you, and it's good for them because they're earning money, and it's good for their families. So improve your early intervention. Coming back to the budget, I think the big key message from this, frankly, is alert, assuming you've got pension salary sacrifice, alert your leadership team to this change. They know about it, but they won't really understand the size and the scale of the challenge, and say, right, we need a plan, and we need to be building that plan next year. We don't need to deliver it next year, but we need to have a plan about what we're going to do.
I think communicating once you've got a plan, actually communicating it to employees that you've got a plan might provide some reassurance that you know what you're doing. So
yeah, absolutely. And if nothing else, I think that's a very good point, actually, Tim. I should have said that. In terms of comms, I would be inclined to put out something sooner rather than later, saying, yes, there is this change. It is down the line. We are looking at it, but pensions are still a good thing. Stop. You don't need to pick away at it. Just they're still a good thing.
Thanks very much. Rakshanda has asked if we can share a link to the Keep Britain Working review. I'm sure we can afterwards. So we can send it.
It's in my slides anyway. At the very bottom, I've got the links for the various documents, so it's there anyway.
That's there we go then. So we'll pull that out and put that with the email anyway. So that's that. Patrick actually asked a question: do you think the government will look at other salary sacrifice schemes going forward, such as the electric car scheme, as it seems they are now targeting the use of EVs? Yes, exactly, with a pay per mile scheme. So do you think they might look at other salary sacrifice schemes?
Again, I mean, to be fair to any chancellor in any government, you've got to look at where you're spending the money, and salary sacrifice often is quite a big cost, particularly when you're talking about cars. And don't forget about whether they're EVs or not. Cars cost a lot of money, therefore salary sacrifice associated with it will cost a lot of money. Will they target EVs? Yes, eventually, but I do stress the eventually. For the moment, the drive remains, despite all the sort of negativity around it, and quite rightly so, to move us from a petrol-based economy to an electric-based economy. I think that will continue at a pace. The charges they brought in on mileage for EVs, yes, I mean they will hurt some people who've got EVs, but they're relatively low compared to how much those of us with petrol and diesel cars pay on our taxation for every time we fill up a tank. So I don't see them changing the big ticket item EV anytime soon. If there's some smaller ticket items, possibly, but small ticket items don't tend to appear on the radar of the budget because they're not a big enough number to make a difference.
Okay, no, thanks, Steve. Jem has asked, will employees still be able to use pension salary sacrifice to reduce income below the 100k threshold to remain eligible for funded childcare hours? Haven't seen this clarified yet.
Yes,
it's quite a specific one. Yeah?
you've still got the £2,000 that you can use and get the full national insurance on, and that will still reduce your salary by £2,000. So therefore, if you're on you're £101,000, you take the £2,000, you're below the 100k line. So yes, that still applies, and yes, you can still. And this is my take on it, by the way. So I'm not saying this is right. We haven't got any detail. Let's be honest. You can still sacrifice a lot more than that. You just wouldn't get any national insurance breaks, and neither would the employer. So you can artificially reduce your salary below whatever level you want to. But of course, there's a downside to that. You're earning less money.
Yes, of course. Yes. Paul's asked a question. With the larger increase to the 18 to 20-year-old minimum wage, what might the impact of changes to minimum auto-enrolment age be?
Pass.
You don't have to answer every single one.
Yeah, no, that one. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been that close in recent years to the minimum auto enrolment ages. They were generally moving down, and I think that will continue. What the interaction between the two is, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I will happily have a look at that. Well, I mean, ask me again afterwards. I'll take a look.
Well, if you don't mind, Steve, if you are able to have a look, and maybe if you've got an answer, we can always put that when we send out the slides, and but perhaps
very happy to.
So okay, I think we're almost there actually in terms of questions at the moment. Well, we've still got a few more minutes. Any last questions before we move on briefly? There were quite a lot of questions, Steve, so it's clearly...
I feel I've got away with it fairly lightly.
So, okay, well, so obviously, obviously, thank you so much, Steve, for today and for answering these questions. I think there's one or two more webinars in you as well for the new year, perhaps. If you do want to contact Steve directly, we've got his details. This will be on the slides when we sent out. Obviously, mine are on there as well if you want to talk to me about anything reward related as well. Before we go, we've got a couple more, if you could put next slide, Steve, we've got a couple more events in the new year actually, which might be of interest to you. First one, which we thought would hit the mark, was conquering HR overwhelm. Everyone's so busy with things at the moment. We're working, we've got a webinar with People Business to talk about how you can overcome those sorts of challenges. We thought start the new year with sort of New Year's resolutions from a professional perspective. So that's coming soon, and we do our usual roundtable discussion on pay, where we are with pay awards for 2026, the latest figures from our market database, what things to consider, what the sort of predictions look like, and where things are going, and that's later on in January. So we'll be sending out full details of that in the next few weeks, and if you do want to sign up for those, both those webinars, 1 hour long, so not a huge amount of time, start the year with some extra useful information. So that's coming up. It just leads me to say thank you so much everyone for joining and for staying the course until now. Thank you again, Steve. That was fantastic as always. Really helpful. I hope everyone has a good end to the year, a fantastic Christmas, and we'll hopefully see you next time. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Happy Christmas.
Speak again soon. Happy Christmas. Yes. Thanks, Steve.
Cheers.